My name is Savannah Blake, and I'm a 27-year-old woman from Portland, Oregon. If you had asked me 2 years ago what my life would look like right now, I would have painted you the picture of a happily engaged woman, planning her dream wedding and building a future with the man she loved. I was so sure that's where I was headed. Instead, I'm sitting here sharing my story with you. A story I never imagined would become my reality, but one that taught me more about myself, love, and family than any fairy tale ever could. I met Ethan when I was 24. It was the kind of whirlwind romance that you think only happens in movies. He was everything I ever hoped to find in a partner: kind, humble, thoughtful, and supportive in all the ways that mattered. We met at a local bookstore where he worked part-time while finishing his graduate degree. I still remember the way he smiled at me when I asked him where to find a particular novel, and how that one simple question turned into coffee, then dinner, and eventually something deeper. Ethan wasn't flashy or arrogant. He was soft-spoken, a good listener, and made me feel seen. Our relationship grew steadily, filled with laughter, deep conversations, and shared dreams. We talked about the kind of life we wanted: a small house with a garden, a dog named Milo, traveling across the country in a beat-up camper someday. We built castles in the air, but I truly believed we'd make them real. For almost a year, everything felt perfect. But as perfect as Ethan was, there was always one shadow that lingered on the edges of our relationship: his family. Ethan came from what he called a very traditional background. His parents were old school, conservative, and deeply concerned with appearances. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured, like any family, they had their quirks and we'd work through it. Besides, I thought if Ethan loved me, surely his family would learn to as well. I was so naive. The day came when Ethan told me his parents wanted to meet me. I remember the way his voice hesitated as he said it. There was this flicker in his eyes, as if he knew what might be coming but didn't want to believe it. He assured me not to stress. They'd love me, he said. They just needed to see how happy I made him. So I put on my best dress, the one that made me feel confident, and walked into what I thought would be a warm, welcoming dinner. His parents lived in a beautiful colonial-style house in the suburbs. The kind of place that looked perfect on the outside: well-kept garden, white picket fence, sparkling clean windows. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt like I'd entered a stage set, where everything was for show, and the audience was waiting to judge me. His mother, Patricia, greeted me first. She wore pearls around her neck and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her handshake was firm, but cold. She called me dear, in a way that sounded more like stranger. His father, Richard, was quieter, but his eyes said plenty. They scanned me head to toe, not in admiration, but as if they were assessing a purchase. The dinner was uncomfortable from the start. I tried to make conversation, asking about their interests, their travels, sharing funny stories about Ethan and me. But everything I said seemed to land flat. Patricia would smile politely, then change the subject. Richard would nod, but his eyes kept flicking to his wife, as if waiting for her cue. The food was delicious, but it felt like eating in slow motion, every bite heavy with the weight of silence or thinly veiled critique. It was the little things they said that began to chip away at my excitement. Patricia complimented my dress, but added, "You're brave to wear something so simple. Most girls these days try a little harder when meeting their future in-laws." Richard asked about my job, and when I told him I worked in nonprofit fundraising, he raised an eyebrow and said, "Oh, that's noble. I suppose you're not too concerned about making a solid living then." I laughed them off at the time, determined not to let their words get under my skin. But as the evening went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being measured, and I was falling short of their expectations in every way. They didn't want to get to know me. They wanted to find flaws. When I helped clear the table, Patricia followed me into the kitchen. That was when she dropped the mask, just for a moment. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on my arm and said, in a voice low enough that Ethan wouldn't hear, "Savannah, dear, I hope you know what you're doing. Our family has certain standards, and Ethan deserves the best. I do hope you can rise to that." Then she smiled again, as if she hadn't just insulted me. On the drive home, I tried to brush it off. I told Ethan it was just nerves on my part, or maybe his parents were tired. He apologized for their behavior, saying they were slow to warm up to new people. But in my heart, a tiny seed of doubt had been planted. I wanted to believe it would get better. I wanted to believe that love was enough. The visits that followed weren't any easier. There were always subtle jabs, comments that seemed harmless on the surface but dripped with condescension. Patricia would ask if I had considered going back to school, for a more practical degree, or suggest I might want to take a class on etiquette just for fun. Richard once asked if I had any family money or trust funds I hadn't mentioned. I started to dread the visits, but I kept going for Ethan. He kept promising me it would get better. But deep down, I think he knew. His mother had no intention of welcoming me with open arms. That warm smile she wore at the door was just part of the performance. Behind the scenes, she was already laying the groundwork for control. Control over Ethan, over our relationship, and eventually over me. And that was only the beginning. So, if you like the story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It helps to grow our channel, and it motivates me to make more interesting stories for you. I'd love to know where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how far this story reaches. I wish I could say that first dinner was the worst of it, that I walked out of that house and things slowly got better between me and Ethan's family. But the truth is, that night was just the beginning of a long, slow unraveling. One that I didn't even see clearly at the time because I was so determined to make it work. I was so in love with Ethan, so sure that we could overcome anything, that I ignored the small signs that should have made me pause. I convinced myself that I was overthinking, that it was normal for in-laws to be a little guarded at first, that they'd warm up eventually. But those small signs weren't harmless quirks. They were the first cracks in the facade, the early warnings of just how twisted things really were. In the weeks that followed that uncomfortable dinner, Ethan's mom, Patricia, and his dad, Richard, seemed to go out of their way to include me in family events. At first, I took it as a good sign. Maybe they were trying. Maybe they were giving me a chance. There were Sunday brunches at their house, charity galas where they insisted I attend, and even little things like family movie nights where they invited me over to join. It felt, on the surface, like they were opening the door. But it didn't take long for me to realize that what they were really doing was watching me, measuring me, testing me. Patricia had a way of offering compliments that felt like tiny cuts. At brunch one morning, she smiled at me and said, "Savannah, that's such a cute dress. I've always admired girls who can make budget fashion look so elegant." Another time, when I brought a homemade pie for dessert, she gushed about how sweet I was to try and contribute, even though baking can be so tricky when you don't have the right equipment at home. And when I helped clear dishes after dinner, she'd sigh with a smile and say, "You're such a hard worker, dear." That's what matters most when someone doesn't come from much. Every word seemed kind on the surface, but each carried a blade hidden underneath. Richard wasn't as obvious, but his tactics were no less unsettling. He'd ask about my job. At first, I thought he was just making conversation, but his questions kept coming back to money. What did I earn at my nonprofit? Did I have plans to switch to something more sustainable when Ethan and I married? Had I considered getting certified in something more practical, so I could contribute to the household in a meaningful way? It was like he saw me as a balance sheet, not a person. And whenever I gave an answer, he'd nod with this expression that said he already knew I wasn't good enough. Ethan, bless his heart, was stuck in the middle. I could see how much he hated it. After every visit, he'd wrap his arms around me and whisper, "I'm so sorry. They'll come around, I know they will. Just give them time." And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love could bridge the gap, that if I just tried harder, they'd see me for who I was. So I kept showing up. I kept smiling through the barbs. I kept telling myself that their approval didn't matter, even as it ate at me. One evening, things came to a head in a way I never saw coming. Patricia had invited me over to help plan a charity fundraiser she was co-chairing. I thought maybe this was my chance to show her I could fit into their world. Maybe if she saw me contributing, she'd stop seeing me as some outsider trying to take her son away. So I went, notebook in hand, eager to help. The night started out like the others. Patricia greeted me with her usual tight-lipped smile, led me to the living room, and handed me a folder of notes. She gave me tasks that felt more like busy work, calling vendors, checking prices, writing down RSVP lists. I worked quietly while she flitted around making calls and sipping tea, occasionally throwing me a glance as if to make sure I was still there, still trying. At one point, I excused myself to use the restroom. Their house was large, and the guest bathroom was down the hall near Patricia's private sitting room. As I passed the doorway, I heard voices, Patricia and I realized her sister on speakerphone. I should have kept walking. I should have respected their privacy. But something about the tone of Patricia's voice made me pause just out of sight, heart racing. "She's sweet enough," Patricia was saying. "But let's be honest, she's cheap insurance for their future." Ethan's too soft to see it, but she's no match for what our family needs. No background, no connections, no money. I give it a year before she's either pregnant or gone. Either way, she won't last. Her sister laughed, a cold, sharp sound. Well, better she's cheap insurance than no insurance at all. Just make sure she signs a prenup if it gets that far. I stood there frozen. My stomach twisted, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls of that perfect house were closing in on me. Cheap insurance. That's what she thought of me. Not as a person, not as a partner for her son, but as some placeholder, some safeguard against Ethan making worse choices. I wasn't family. I was a tool. I slipped back down the hall, hands trembling, and splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom. I stared at my reflection, trying to calm myself, trying to decide what to do. Should I confront her? Should I leave right then and there? Should I tell Ethan? My mind raced with questions, none of which had easy answers. In the end, I did what I'd been doing all along. I went back to the living room, sat down, and finished the work she'd given me, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. I told myself I needed time to think, to process, to figure out how to handle this without making things worse for Ethan. That night, as I lay in bed, Ethan beside me fast asleep, I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me crack. The image I'd built in my mind, the one where his family eventually saw me as one of their own, where we all lived happily ever after, shattered. I realized, with painful clarity, that no amount of patience or effort on my part was going to change how they saw me. They didn't want me to belong. They didn't think I ever could. And yet I stayed. I stayed because I loved Ethan, because I believed in us, because I thought maybe, just maybe, I could prove them wrong. But from that night on, I started noticing every look, every comment, every test they put me through. And with each one, the truth became harder to ignore. They didn't want a daughter-in-law. They wanted someone they could mold, control, and eventually discard if I didn't fit their plan. Looking back, I wish I'd listened to my gut that night. I wish I'd walked away. But love makes you blind sometimes. And I was still holding on to hope that somehow, against all odds, we could make it work. But as you'll see, hope only takes you so far when the people around you are playing a different game entirely. It had been several weeks since that night I overheard Patricia call me cheap insurance for their future. Weeks of me pretending I hadn't heard, pretending I didn't notice the sharp comments, the cold glances, the way the room seemed to freeze whenever I walked in. I kept telling myself to focus on Ethan, on us. He was worth it, I thought. He had to be. But each visit chipped away at that belief, leaving me raw, exhausted, and anxious in a way I couldn't explain to friends or family without sounding paranoid. So when Patricia invited me for tea one Saturday afternoon, I felt a strange mix of dread and hope. Maybe this was her attempt at extending an olive branch. Maybe she wanted to clear the air, to start fresh, to actually talk to me like a person, not a problem she had to solve. I clung to that hope, because what else could I do? I arrived at the house right on time, heart pounding as I walked up the familiar steps. The door opened before I could even knock. Patricia stood there, dressed to perfection as always, her pearl earrings glinting in the sunlight, that same polite smile on her face that I'd come to distrust. "Savannah, dear. Come in," she said, stepping aside. Her voice was warm, but it felt rehearsed. Everything about her felt rehearsed, like she was playing a role in a play only she understood. I stepped inside, feeling the weight of the house, of its spotless floors and perfectly arranged furniture, of its suffocating perfection. She led me to the sunroom, where a pot of tea and delicate china cups waited on a small table. I sat, smoothing my skirt, trying to calm my nerves. Patricia poured the tea, her movements precise, graceful, as if this was just another pleasant afternoon with her future daughter-in-law. For a few minutes, we made small talk, about the weather, about a charity gala she was planning, about nothing that mattered. I waited for her to get to the point, because I could feel it coming, like a storm building on the horizon. And then she did. She set her cup down gently, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at me with eyes that, for the first time, dropped the pretense. There was no warmth there, no kindness, only cold calculation. "Savannah," she began, her tone smooth, almost soothing, like she was offering me a gift. "I think it's time we talked honestly, woman to woman." I nodded, heart hammering. "Of course," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You and Ethan have become very serious. And as his mother, I have a responsibility to ensure his future is secure." Something about the way she said secure made my stomach twist. I said nothing, waiting. "You're a lovely girl," she continued. "But I think you understand that marriage isn't just about love. It's about partnership, stability, and protecting what matters. Our family has built something over generations. And when someone new joins us, we must be certain they bring as much as they take." Her words hung in the air, heavy, deliberate. I felt a chill despite the sun streaming through the windows. "I don't understand," I said, though I was starting to. I just didn't want to believe it. She sighed, as if I was a child who needed something explained slowly. "Let me be clear. If you truly wish to marry Ethan, we expect a contribution. A gesture that shows your commitment to the family's well-being. $200,000. For family harmony, of course." Her words hit like a slap. I stared at her, stunned. For a moment, I wondered if I'd misheard. But the look on her face told me I hadn't. "You're asking me to pay you? To marry your son?" I asked, my voice shaking. Patricia leaned back, unbothered. "It's not a payment. It's an investment. A show of good faith. Surely, if you're serious about building a life with Ethan, you'd want to ensure stability for the family you're joining." I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. I opened my mouth to respond, but she raised a hand, as if to stop me. "I'm trying to help you, Savannah. Without this, I'm afraid there will be complications. You know how people talk. How reputations can be damaged. I'd hate for that to happen. For Ethan's sake, of course." There it was. The threat beneath the civility. The iron fist in the velvet glove. If I didn't pay, she'd see to it that I was cast out, my name smeared, my relationship with Ethan destroyed. And all the while, she'd smile and claim she was only acting in everyone's best interest. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth. This wasn't about protecting Ethan. It wasn't even about the money, not really. It was about power. About control. About making sure I knew my place from the start. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. "Does Ethan know about this?" Patricia's smile didn't falter. "Ethan trusts me to handle these things. He wouldn't want the stress. And I trust you won't burden him with it either." That was the moment I realized just how trapped she thought I was. She believed I had no choice. That I'd be so desperate to stay with Ethan, I'd find a way to meet her demand. That I'd stay silent, play along, and let her pull the strings. But inside, something hardened. Something that had been bending and twisting and breaking under the weight of her cruelty finally snapped into place. I saw her for what she was, and I knew what I had to do. I stood, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "Thank you for the tea, Patricia. I think I've heard enough." Her eyes narrowed, just for a second, before the polite mask slipped back into place. "Of course, dear. Take your time to consider. I'm sure you'll make the right choice." I walked out of that house, out of that perfect sunroom with its delicate teacups and poisonous conversation, and I felt the sunlight on my face like a promise. A promise that I could choose differently, that I could walk away. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Ethan beside me, unaware of the battle that had taken place. I thought about telling him, but the truth was, if he didn't see what was happening by now, would he ever? Could he ever stand up to her? Or would I always be fighting this war alone? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't paying. Not a cent. Not now. Not ever. When I left Patricia's house that afternoon, the sun was still high, casting long golden streaks across the city streets. But inside me, everything felt dark. The air felt heavy in my lungs as I drove home in silence, my fingers gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I kept hearing her voice over and over in my head, calm, calculated, as if what she asked of me was perfectly reasonable. $200,000 for the privilege of marrying Ethan. For family harmony, she had said, as if that price tag could buy love or peace. By the time I pulled into my apartment's parking lot, I felt like I was holding my heart together with sheer willpower. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, the engine ticking softly as it cooled, trying to make sense of what had happened. And more than anything, I wondered how Ethan would react. Would he defend me? Would he finally see his mother for who she truly was? Or would he, like always, ask me to be patient and understanding? When I walked through the door, Ethan was already there. He looked up from the couch, relief washing over his face. "Savannah," he said, crossing the room to hug me. I froze for a moment, my body stiff in his arms, and then I let myself melt into him, just for a second, because I needed it. Because despite everything, I loved him. But even as I held him, I knew something had changed between us. Something I couldn't unsee, couldn't unknow. We sat down and I told him. Every word. I told him what Patricia said, how she demanded the money, how she wrapped it in false kindness and fake concern, and how she threatened to ruin us if I didn't comply. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from his face. His hands trembled slightly where they rested on his knees. And when I finished, when I sat back and waited for him to say something, anything, he didn't deny it. He didn't call her a liar or rush to my defense like I'd so desperately hoped. Instead, he buried his face in his hands and let out a long, broken sigh. "Savannah," he said, his voice hollow, "please. Just consider it. She won't stop. She'll make our lives hell otherwise. I don't want to lose you, but I don't know how to fight her." That was the moment the final crack split wide open. I looked at him, this man I loved, the man I thought I'd spend forever with, and I saw the truth. He wasn't my partner in this. He couldn't be, because he was just as trapped as I would be if I stayed. Maybe more so. And he didn't have the strength to break free. He was asking me to do what he couldn't, to buy our happiness, to give in so that we could keep pretending everything was okay. But I couldn't do it. I wouldn't. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Memories flooded me. Our first date, our first kiss, the way I'd felt when we said, "I love you" for the first time. All those dreams we'd shared about our future together, the house, the dog, the road trips. I mourned them like a death, because I knew in my heart that they were gone. That no amount of love could build a life on a foundation of control and greed. The next morning, before the sun had even fully risen, I packed a bag. Not because I had anywhere to go just yet, but because I knew I couldn't stay. Ethan woke up and saw me by the door, my coat in my hand, and his face crumpled in panic. "Savannah, please. Don't do this. We can figure it out. We can talk to her again." I shook my head, tears streaming down my cheeks. "We can't. You know we can't. I can't be part of this. I love you, Ethan, but I won't be bought. And I won't let your mother own our future." He tried to stop me, but his words felt as hollow as his promises that things would get better. I kissed him one last time, tasted the salt of both our tears, and walked out the door. I thought that would be the hardest part, leaving the man I loved, walking away from the life we'd planned. But in truth, the hardest part came afterward, because I soon discovered that walking away wasn't enough. Patricia wasn't going to let me go quietly. At first, I tried to move on, to keep my head down and focus on rebuilding my life. I stayed with a friend while I searched for my own place. I threw myself into my work, trying to drown the heartbreak in long hours and good causes. But it wasn't long before the whispers started reaching me. A colleague mentioned hearing that I'd tried to trap a wealthy man into marriage for his money. A mutual friend of Ethan's and mine told me people were saying I'd demanded a payout from his family and stormed off when they refused. Even at the coffee shop where I used to sit with Ethan on lazy Sunday mornings, I caught people glancing at me and whispering behind their hands. It didn't take much to trace it all back. Patricia had done exactly what she'd hinted she would. She was spreading lies, rewriting the story to make me the villain. In her version, I was the gold digger, the schemer, the woman who tried to extort her poor son and his family for a fortune. And she did it with the same smooth, polished smile she wore at all those charity galas. The same voice she'd used to offer me tea and destroy my dreams in the same breath. The first time I ran into someone who believed her story, it felt like a punch to the gut. A woman I'd worked with on a fundraising campaign, someone I'd considered a friend, looked at me with thinly veiled contempt and said, "I thought you were better than that, Savannah." I guess I was wrong. I tried to explain, but the words fell flat. The damage was done. Patricia's version of events had taken root, and no one wanted to hear mine. For a while, I considered fighting back. I thought about calling her out publicly, about sharing the truth with anyone who would listen. But then I realized that doing so would only drag me further into her game. Patricia thrived on control, on manipulation, on pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The best way to win against someone like that wasn't to play their game. It was to refuse to play at all. So I stayed quiet. I let the lies swirl around me like smoke, and I focused on clearing the air in my own world. I found a small apartment, nothing fancy but mine. I adopted a dog from the shelter, a sweet, scruffy mutt I named Milo after all. And piece by piece, I started building the life I wanted. A life free from Patricia's poison, from the weight of a family that had tried to buy and break me. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness felt like a physical ache. When I missed Ethan so badly it stole my breath. when I questioned whether I'd done the right thing. But deep down, I knew I had. Because love isn't supposed to come with a price tag. And no amount of money is worth selling your soul. In the end, Patricia could spread all the lies she wanted. The people who mattered would see the truth in how I lived, in the choices I made, in the peace I found when I finally walked away from her game. And that, more than anything, was the victory she could never take from me. The weeks after I walked away from Ethan and his family felt like living in the eye of a storm. Everything around me had gone quiet, but I could feel the pressure building, the weight of things unsaid, unseen, waiting to explode. I tried to focus on my own small victories, getting my apartment in order, adjusting to life with Milo, finding moments of peace in the simple things. But the world beyond my front door was changing in ways I couldn't control. And it all started with the lies Patricia spread about me. At first, I only heard fragments. A mutual friend texted me late one night, asking if it was true that I'd tried to blackmail Ethan's family. My heart dropped reading those words. Blackmail. It was so absurd, so far from the truth, that I laughed for a second before realizing how serious it was. Then came the other calls and messages. People I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly reaching out, not out of concern but curiosity, or worse, judgment. They wanted the scandalous details. They wanted to know what I'd done to deserve the shame Patricia was so carefully orchestrating. Everywhere I turned, the story was the same. I was painted as the greedy girl who'd tried to sink her claws into a wealthy family and stormed off when they wouldn't hand over their fortune. The fact that I'd walked away with nothing, that I'd chosen my self-respect over their money, didn't fit the narrative Patricia was spinning. And so it was erased. I kept my head down, resisting the urge to defend myself. I knew that arguing with her lies would only feed the fire. That's what she wanted. She wanted me to engage, to give her more material to twist and use against me. So I focused on my work, on my dog, on the small life I was building from the ashes of what I'd lost. And quietly, behind the scenes, the cracks in their perfect image began to show. It started small. An old acquaintance of Patricia's, someone I barely knew, reached out to me after a charity event where Patricia had spoken. "Funny thing," she said, her voice laced with amusement and just a hint of bitterness. "She spent half the night talking about you. You'd think a woman so focused on appearances would have better sense than to air dirty laundry in public." The woman paused, then added, "But that's the thing about people like her. They always go too far eventually." Then came the email from someone who claimed to be a former employee of the family business. It was short, just a few lines, but enough to make my pulse race. "You don't know me, but I saw what they did to you. You're not the first. They've been covering up things for years. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." At first, I didn't respond. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I'd spent so much time trying to put distance between myself and that family that the idea of getting dragged back in made my stomach churn. But curiosity got the better of me. One sleepless night, I wrote back, asking what they meant. The answer came quickly, as if they'd been waiting for me to ask. Stories poured out about unpaid contractors, about hush money given to former staff who'd threatened to sue, about questionable bookkeeping that skirted the line of legality. I learned that the family's success wasn't as clean as it seemed. There were rumors of tax fraud, of debts hidden behind shell companies, of donations that never reached the charities they were meant for. It was a tangled web, one Patricia had managed to keep under wraps for years thanks to her charm, her connections, and her ruthless determination to protect the family name. But now the cracks were widening. More voices joined the chorus. A former family friend reached out to me through social media, someone I'd met only once at a party. She told me how she distanced herself from Patricia years ago after being pressured into a shady investment deal that cost her thousands. "She's not as untouchable as she thinks she is," the woman wrote. "People are starting to talk. You just keep doing what you're doing. The truth has a way of finding the light." And then, as if the universe decided it was time, a journalist got wind of it all. I remember the email like it was yesterday. His name was Daniel Ruiz, an investigative reporter for a local paper known for its in-depth coverage of corruption and scandals that the bigger outlets overlooked. His message was respectful but direct. He explained that he'd been following the family for a while, hearing whispers about things that didn't add up, and that my name had come up more than once in conversations with sources. He wanted to know if I'd talked to him. Not for a tell-all, not for a revenge piece, but to help him understand the bigger picture. At first, I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to be dragged into another round of drama. But there was something about his message that felt genuine. He wasn't interested in gossip. He was interested in the truth. We met at a quiet coffee shop downtown, one where I felt safe, where I could see the door and the street beyond it. Daniel was kind, patient, and nothing like the predatory reporters I'd imagined. He didn't push. He listened. I told him what I knew, not just about the ultimatum Patricia had given me, but about the things I'd heard from the former employee, the family friend, the little details I'd noticed over the years that hadn't made sense at the time, but now painted a clearer picture. Daniel took notes, asked careful questions, and thanked me for my time. He promised not to use my name unless I gave him permission, and I believed him. There was something in his eyes that told me he wanted justice, not a headline. And for the first time since this all began, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth would win out. Over the next few weeks, I heard from Daniel a few more times. He'd uncovered more than even I expected: documents, records, testimonies that painted a damning portrait of Patricia and Richard's carefully constructed empire. And as his investigation gained momentum, so did the whispers in the community. People who'd once looked at me with suspicion began to look at the family instead, questioning what they thought they knew. I stayed quiet, as I always had. But this time, it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like strength. Because I knew that the truth was bigger than me, bigger than Patricia's lies, bigger than the shame they tried to pin on me. And as their secrets began to unravel, I realized that walking away had been the most powerful choice I could have made. Not just for my own peace, but because it gave karma the space to do its work. And oh, how it did. After my conversation with Daniel, the journalist, something inside me shifted. For so long, I had been trying to distance myself from the mess that was Ethan's family. I told myself that silence was strength, that if I just kept my head down, the lies would lose their grip on my name. But as Daniel's investigation unfolded, as tiny bits of truth began to leak out into the world, I found myself wanting to understand. What had I almost tied my life to? What secrets lurked beneath the polished surface of the people who had tried to put a price on my future? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed answers, not for revenge, but for my own peace. Daniel and I kept in touch. Our first meeting turned into a series of quiet conversations over coffee or in tucked-away corners of the city where no one would think to look for us. Every time we met, he came with new findings, each more disturbing than the last. What started as whispers about unpaid workers turned into concrete evidence. Contractors who had been hired to work on the family's properties had simply stopped receiving payments midway through jobs. Some were threatened with lawsuits if they spoke out. Others were strung along with false promises until they gave up entirely, afraid of the legal battle they couldn't afford. Then there were the charities. On the surface, the family was known for their generosity. Patricia in particular loved to be photographed at galas, at fundraisers, handing over giant checks with a smile. But when Daniel started pulling records, a different picture emerged. Donations that were publicly announced in the press often didn't match what actually arrived in the charity's accounts. Funds meant for community programs were quietly redirected to cover the family's personal expenses or funneled into shell organizations that existed only on paper. The more we uncovered, the more sickened I felt. These weren't harmless white lies or clever business tactics. This was theft wrapped in a velvet glove. It became clear that Patricia and Richard had built their empire not on hard work and honor, as they so often claimed, but on a carefully constructed house of cards. One strong breeze, one person brave enough to pull at the right thread, and the whole thing could come crashing down. And what haunted me most was how close I'd come to being part of it. If I had stayed, if I had paid the price they asked or tried to make peace for the sake of love, I would have been complicit in all of it. My name would have been tied to theirs, my future swallowed by their lies. I thought that was where the story ended. I thought I could keep watching from the sidelines, letting Daniel do the work, letting the truth come out piece by piece. But then something happened that I never expected. Someone from inside the family reached out to me. It started with a message. Simple. Cryptic. I can help. They've done worse than you know. Meet me. At first, I thought it was a joke, or worse, a trap. But curiosity, and maybe a bit of defiance, got the better of me. I agreed cautiously and arranged to meet the sender in a quiet park early one morning. The person waiting for me was someone I recognized instantly, though we'd never been close. Ethan's cousin, a man named Caleb, who had always seemed like the quiet, watchful type at family events. The one who stood at the edges of conversations, listening more than he spoke. The one Patricia often dismissed with a wave of her hand, calling him soft or sensitive when he disagreed with her. He looked nervous as I approached, his eyes darting around as if to make sure no one was watching. "I shouldn't be doing this," he said, his voice low. "But I can't keep my mouth shut anymore. I saw what they did to you. And I've seen what they've done to other people for years. It's wrong. And I have proof." I didn't know what to say. I just listened as he spoke, pouring out years of frustration and guilt. Caleb had worked behind the scenes in the family's businesses for a while, long enough to see the records, the forged signatures, the fake invoices. He'd tried to speak up before, but Patricia had a way of making sure dissent disappeared, either with threats, with payoffs, or by cutting people out entirely. He'd stayed quiet because he didn't know what else to do. But watching how they destroyed my reputation, how they turned their poison on me after I refused to play their game, had been the final straw for him. From a worn messenger bag, Caleb pulled out a folder thick with documents. Emails, bank records, contracts with altered figures. Evidence of fraud so blatant, it was hard to believe they'd gotten away with it for so long. He handed it to me like it was burning his hands. "Give this to your reporter friend," he said. "And be careful. They don't like loose ends." I thanked him, though the words felt small compared to what he'd just risked. He left quickly, blending into the early morning crowd, and I stood there for a long moment, holding that folder like it was the key to something I wasn't sure I was ready to unlock. When I gave the documents to Daniel, his eyes widened as he flipped through them. "Savannah," he said, his voice tinged with awe and something like relief. "This is it. This is what we needed." Over the next several weeks, Daniel worked tirelessly, verifying Caleb's evidence, cross-referencing it with the things he'd already found, building a case so airtight not even Patricia's charm could talk her way out of it. I stayed on the sidelines, as I had before, watching as the walls they'd built around themselves began to crack and crumble. Their name, once so respected, started to draw suspicion instead of admiration. The invitations to galas dried up. The smiling photos in society pages stopped appearing. And slowly, the people who had once defended them began to distance themselves, unwilling to be caught in the fallout. I never said a word publicly. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than anything I could have shouted. And as I watched it all unfold, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not because they were finally being exposed, though that brought a certain satisfaction, but because I knew, without a doubt, that walking away had been the right choice. I had escaped a life built on lies, and I had done it on my own terms. There's power in the truth. And sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to bring it into the light. By the time the headlines began to surface, I had started to feel like I could breathe again. Quietly, in the background of my life, the storm that had been brewing for so long finally broke wide open. News outlets that once praised Patricia and Richard for their generosity and community involvement now splashed their names across front pages with words like fraud, embezzlement, and scandal. I never imagined I would live to see their empire crumble so spectacularly. But there it was, unfolding day by day, as truth poured out in ways no amount of money or influence could contain. The lawsuits came first. Contractors who had been silenced by threats now had proof in their hands. Documents Caleb had helped Daniel verify. Charities that had been shortchanged or used as fronts for tax evasion filed complaints, and investigations followed. Business partners who had once turned a blind eye realized the ship was sinking and rushed to save themselves, exposing deals and backroom bargains that had once been locked away behind smiles and handshakes. Every day, it seemed, there was another revelation, another secret dragged out into the light. And with each one, the family's carefully curated image shattered further. The invitations to galas and fundraisers stopped coming. The friends who had once clung to Patricia at social events slipped away, unwilling to be associated with the wreckage. Their name became a cautionary tale, a reminder that no amount of wealth or charm could protect you from the consequences of greed. I watched it all from the sidelines, just as I had planned. I stayed quiet. I didn't give interviews. I didn't post cryptic messages or share triumphant declarations. I simply lived my life, focused on the small, steady things that had grounded me through the storm. Milo's wagging tail when I came home from work. The way my apartment smelled after I baked bread on a Sunday afternoon. The warmth of friends who stood by me through it all, never once doubting my truth. I let the world do what it would with the story, because I no longer felt the need to control it. Then one evening, long after I thought I'd heard the last of Ethan, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether to answer. Some part of me already knew who it was. My curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up. Savannah. The voice on the other end was shaky, hollow in a way that made my heart ache even as my guard shot up. It's me. It's Ethan. I didn't speak at first, waiting. I didn't know what he wanted, what he could possibly say now that would change anything. After a moment, he filled the silence. I didn't know who else to call. I'm so sorry. For everything. I should have stood up to them. I should have protected you. And now it's all gone. Everything. His voice cracked on that last word, and I heard the weight of his shame, his grief. I closed my eyes, memories flooding in, of the boy I'd loved, of the man who had once promised me forever, who had let his family poison it. I had imagined this conversation so many times. I had pictured him begging for forgiveness, pictured myself feeling vindicated. But now that it was real, I just felt tired. I don't know what you want me to say, Ethan, I said finally, my voice soft but firm. I'm sorry you're hurting, but you made your choice. We both did. He let out a breath that sounded like it carried the weight of the world. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago. I felt my pulse quicken, dread mixing with curiosity. What is it? He hesitated, then spoke, the words tumbling out in a rush. That day, the day my mom asked you for money, she had a plan if you said no. She was going to frame you. She had people ready to claim you'd stolen from the family business, that you'd forged documents to get access to our accounts. She showed me the papers she'd had drawn up. Fake evidence. She said if you wouldn't pay, she'd ruin you so badly you'd never recover. I felt the room tilt, the floor falling out from under me. I had known Patricia was cruel. I had known she was manipulative. But hearing this, hearing just how far she'd been willing to go to destroy me, took my breath away. I thought of all the times I doubted myself, wondered if I was overreacting. And now I saw just how close I had come to disaster. Why are you telling me this now? I whispered, my voice shaking. Because I can't carry it anymore, Ethan said, and I believed him. He sounded broken, hollowed out by guilt and regret. Because I'm sorry. And because I need you to know it wasn't you. It was never you. It was them. All of it. I sat in silence for a long time, letting the truth wash over me. Part of me wanted to rage at him, to ask why he hadn't warned me then, when it could have made a difference. But the larger part of me knew it didn't matter anymore. The damage had been done, and somehow I had survived it. I hope you find peace, Ethan, I said finally. But I can't be part of this. Not anymore. I understand, he said, his voice barely audible. Thank you for listening. I'm so sorry, Savannah. For everything. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything. How close Patricia had come to destroying me, just because I wouldn't play her game. And I thought about how lucky I was to have walked away when I did. Their world was crumbling, just as they had tried to make mine crumble. But I hadn't needed to lift a finger. All I had done was choose myself, choose my integrity, and let the truth do the rest. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. It had been a few weeks since that phone call with Ethan, the one where he'd confessed the depths of his mother's betrayal and his own regret. I thought that would be the end of it, that he would slip out of my life for good, leaving behind only the echoes of what we'd almost had and the wreckage his family had tried to drag me into. I tried to move on, focusing on my work, on the simple routines that made my small apartment feel like home, on the comfort of Milo curled up at my feet each night. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over. Not yet. One evening, just as the sun was dipping low and painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, there was a knock at my door. At first, I thought it must be a neighbor or a delivery I'd forgotten about. But when I opened it, there stood Ethan. He looked nothing like the man I remembered. His clothes were rumpled, his face pale and drawn, dark circles heavy beneath his eyes. There was no trace of the confident, easy charm that had once made me fall for him. He looked lost. Desperate. Savannah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry to show up like this. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't say anything at first, too stunned to form words. I had imagined this moment so many times, him coming back, him asking for forgiveness, him realizing too late what he'd lost. But now that it was real, I didn't feel vindicated or powerful. I just felt tired. He shifted awkwardly on the doorstep, his hands shoved deep in his pockets like he was trying to hold himself together. Please, just a few minutes. I need to explain. I need your help. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let him in. Milo barked once, sensing my unease, then settled at my feet, watching Ethan with wary eyes. I led him to the kitchen table, where he collapsed into a chair like his legs could no longer hold him up. "I don't know where to start," he said after a moment. "Everything's gone. The businesses, the house, the cars. My parents' friends have all turned their backs. Mom's facing charges, Dad too. There's no money left. Nothing. And I have nowhere to go. No one will help me. I was hoping maybe you could. I don't know. Alone. A place to stay for a little while. Anything." His voice cracked on that last word, and I saw how truly broken he was. But even as part of me ached for the boy I had loved, the man sitting across from me wasn't that boy anymore. And I wasn't the girl who would have done anything for him. That girl had been burned to ash the day his mother tried to put a price on my love, and he stood by and let her. I folded my hands on the table, choosing my words carefully. "Ethan, I'm sorry you're in this position. Truly. I don't wish this pain on anyone. But I can't help you. I owe you nothing. I owe your family nothing. You made your choices. And so did I." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I think in that moment he understood. All the pleading in the world couldn't erase the damage done, couldn't undo the choices that had led us here. His shoulders slumped, and he nodded, tears brimming in his eyes but not falling. "I get it," he whispered. "I had to try. I don't blame you." We sat in silence for a long while after that, the kind of silence that comes when there's nothing left to say. Eventually, he stood, thanked me for listening, and walked out of my life again. This time, I knew he wouldn't be back. And I felt a strange sense of peace, as if a final chapter had closed at last. But the universe wasn't done with me yet. The very next day, I got a call from Daniel. His voice was warm, kind, but I could tell he was holding back something important. "Savannah," he said, "I know you've stayed quiet all this time. I respect that. But people want to hear your side. There's so much speculation, so many lies still floating around. I'm going to run a piece tying everything together, the fraud, the lawsuits, the fallout. And I want to give you the chance to share your truth. On your terms." I felt my breath catch. It was everything I had once dreamed of, the chance to set the record straight, to tell the world who I really was and what I had endured. And yet, the idea made my heart pound with anxiety. Did I want to open that door again? Did I want to attach my name to their scandal, even now that they were crumbling? Daniel, ever respectful, didn't push. "You don't have to decide now," he said. "Think about it. Whether you want your voice in the story or not, you've earned that choice. Just let me know." After I hung up, I sat for a long time in the quiet of my apartment, Milo's soft breathing the only sound. I thought about everything I had been through, the love, the betrayal, the humiliation, and finally, the strength I'd found in walking away. I thought about Ethan, broken and begging on my doorstep. I thought about Patricia, once so powerful, now facing the consequences of her own cruelty. And I realized something important. I didn't need to tell my side to the world to prove anything. I had nothing left to prove. The people who mattered knew the truth. The lies had crumbled along with the family that built them. My silence had spoken louder than any words ever could. And I wasn't going to let them define me one moment longer. The unexpected offer was tempting, but I knew my answer. I chose peace. I chose freedom. I chose myself. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. There is something indescribable about waking up in the morning and feeling no weight on your chest. No lingering dread. No heaviness from secrets you never asked to carry. That's what it felt like when the storm finally passed, and I stepped out into the world with nothing left to hide, nothing left to prove. The empire that Patricia and Richard built on lies had crumbled, piece by piece, under the weight of their own greed. And through it all, I had chosen not to play their game. I had chosen silence when they expected retaliation. I had chosen dignity when they hoped to drag me into the mud with them. And now, finally, I could breathe. The morning after Daniel's article went live, I sat on my small balcony, sipping coffee, watching the city wake up beneath a soft blue sky. The headline had been clean and factual, not sensational or cruel. Local power couple faced charges in widening fraud case. The piece was detailed and thorough. It laid out the facts, the financial misdeeds, the broken promises, the victims who had waited so long for justice. My name was mentioned, but only in passing, as someone who had been targeted by Patricia's manipulations and chosen to walk away. Daniel had honored my wishes. He let the truth stand on its own, without turning me into a spectacle. The response was immediate. My inbox filled with messages, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old friends who had once believed Patricia's lies reached out with apologies, with words of support. Strangers who had followed the case offered kind notes, sharing their own stories of breaking free from toxic relationships. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. I realized, in those quiet moments reading their words, that I wasn't alone. My story had touched people, not because I'd shouted it from the rooftops, but because I'd lived it honestly. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't need it. Watching the truth unfold, watching people finally see Patricia and Richard for who they really were, was enough. I had been tempted, at times, to expose them myself, to give interviews, to write my own story, to shout my innocence from every platform. But I didn't. I let the facts speak. I let their actions condemn them, because in the end, that was far more powerful than anything I could have said. And that choice, the choice not to sink to their level, became a source of pride I carried with me. There were moments when I thought of Ethan. I wondered where he was, how he was surviving now that the foundation of his life had fallen apart. But I didn't reach out. I had said everything I needed to say the night he came to my door. I had offered my compassion, but I had kept my boundaries. I hoped he would find his own way, but I knew it wasn't my responsibility to guide him anymore. With the worst behind me, I turned my focus inward. I poured myself into rebuilding the life I had always dreamed of. Not the life I thought I wanted when I was with Ethan, but the life I wanted for myself. I threw myself into my work, but not in the way I had before, where work was a distraction from pain. Now it was a source of purpose, of fulfillment. I volunteered more, giving my time to causes that truly mattered to me. I redecorated my apartment, turning it into a space that felt like a sanctuary. And I took long walks with Milo every evening, finding peace in the simple rhythm of his paws against the pavement, the way he looked up at me with pure, unconditional love. And then, when I least expected it, someone new stepped into my life. His name was Alex. We met at a local community event, one I had hesitated to attend because I still wasn't sure I was ready to put myself out there. But something nudged me to go. He was helping set up a booth for a literacy program, his sleeves rolled up, a smudge of paint on his cheek, and the warmest smile I had seen in what felt like forever. We struck up a conversation, easy, natural, no pretense. He didn't know my history, didn't know the headlines or the drama. To him, I was just Savannah, a woman standing in front of him, laughing about how terrible I was at tying knots for the banners. It was refreshing, like a clean slate. He didn't look at me with pity or curiosity. He saw me for who I was in that moment, not who I had been. As we got to know each other, I found myself drawn to him in ways that surprised me. He was kind without being overbearing, thoughtful without expecting anything in return. There were no games, no tests, no conditions. He valued me for my mind, my heart, my humor, not for what I could bring to his life in terms of status or wealth. And that, more than anything, showed me how far I had come. I wasn't looking for someone to rescue me. I wasn't trying to fill a void or prove anything. I had already saved myself. Alex was simply a beautiful, unexpected addition to the life I had built. We took things slow. I was honest with him about my past when the time felt right, and he listened without judgment. He didn't press for details, didn't treat me like I was fragile or damaged. He just stood beside me, steady and supportive, as I continued to heal. And with every passing day, I realized how lucky I was, not just to have found him, but to have found myself again. Closure came not in grand gestures or public victories, but in the quiet moments where I chose peace over bitterness, where I chose growth over dwelling on the pain. Patricia and Richard's world had collapsed, but mine had only just begun. And I was determined to fill it with love, with integrity, with joy. Not because of them, not in spite of them, but because I had learned what truly mattered. And I wasn't going to waste another second on anything less. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every sleepless night had led me here. To a life where I was free, where I was whole, where I was truly, finally happy. And that, in the end, was the closure I had always wanted. Closure on my terms, in my own time, and with my head held high. Years have passed since I closed that painful chapter of my life. I sit here now on a quiet Sunday morning, sunlight streaming through my kitchen window, a cup of tea warming my hands, and I feel something I once thought was out of reach: peace. Real, unshakable peace. When I look back on everything that happened, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the lies, and the cruelty, I don't feel bitterness. I don't feel regret. What I feel is gratitude, because I see so clearly now just how close I came to losing myself. And I see how every choice I made, every hard decision, led me to this life that I love so deeply. I built this life on my terms. No one owns a piece of it but me. I have a career that challenges and fulfills me, a home that feels safe and warm, friends who have become my family. And love, true love, that doesn't come with price tags or conditions. Alex and I grew together in ways I never thought possible, and every day with him reminds me that I made the right choice walking away from the twisted world I almost joined. Our life is simple, but it's honest. And that makes all the difference. There are days when I still think of Ethan. Not often and not with longing. More with a sense of distant sorrow for the boy I once loved and the man who couldn't find the courage to stand up for what was right when it mattered most. I wonder where he is, what he's doing. I hope, wherever he landed, he's found some kind of peace too. But I don't dwell on it. That story is over, and I've long since turned the page. As for his parents, they've become little more than a footnote in the community where they once reigned. Patricia and Richard's names are no longer spoken with admiration or envy. They're whispered now with pity or scorn. Forgotten by most, remembered only for the spectacular way they fell. The charity galas, the business awards, the social circles that once welcomed them with open arms, they're gone. No one invites them, no one defends them, no one mourns their absence. Their legacy is a cautionary tale, and I didn't have to lift a finger to make it so. Sometimes, when I walk past the grand house that used to host glittering parties and charity luncheons, I see the windows dark, the gardens overgrown. A bank owns it now, I'm told, or maybe it's tied up in endless legal battles over unpaid debts and seized assets. I don't pay much attention to the details. It's just a house, after all. A hollow shell, much like the people who once lived inside it. I never had to pay a cent to win. That's the part that still makes me smile, quietly to myself, when I think about it. They tried to put a price on love, on respect, on my future. And in the end, it cost them everything, while I walked away richer in ways that truly matter. I won not by fighting dirty, not by seeking revenge, but by choosing myself, by staying true to my values, by trusting that the truth, sooner or later, always finds its way to the light. And then, just when I thought there was nothing left to surprise me in this story, it came, the letter. It arrived on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, tucked among bills and catalogs in my mailbox. A plain white envelope, my name written in careful, unfamiliar handwriting. There was no return address, no hint of who it might be from. Curiosity piqued. I carried it inside, set down my groceries, and sat at the kitchen table to open it. The first thing I saw was the name at the bottom of the page, Patricia. My heart skipped a beat, a rush of emotions flooding in all at once. Shock, confusion, a flicker of anger, a wave of something like pity. I hadn't thought of her in so long. Hadn't said her name out loud. Hadn't spoken about her beyond the rare moment when someone from my past asked about that chapter of my life. And now, here she was, invading my peaceful present with ink on paper. I began to read. The letter was handwritten, the script shaky but legible. She wrote from prison, where she was serving the sentence handed down after the full weight of her crimes had caught up to her. She didn't ask for forgiveness. That surprised me. She didn't try to justify her actions or blame others or make excuses. What she offered was something unexpected, an apology. She wrote of regret, of sleepless nights haunted by the faces of those she'd hurt. She wrote of shame, of realizing too late how hollow her victories had been. She wrote of me, not with flattery or manipulation, but with something that almost felt genuine. She admitted she had tried to control me, to break me, because she was afraid. Afraid of losing power, afraid of losing her son to someone she couldn't bend to her will, afraid of being exposed for the fraud she was. And in that fear, she said, she became the very thing she once despised in others. She didn't expect a response. She didn't ask me to write back. She simply said she wanted me to know that she saw it all clearly now. That she saw me clearly now. And that she hoped, wherever I was, I had found the happiness she had tried to take from me. When I finished reading, I sat in silence, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even feel satisfaction. What I felt most of all was release. As if some last lingering thread had finally been cut, setting me completely free. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, not out of sentimentality, but because it felt like the right thing to do. A record of the final chapter in a story that had once consumed my life, but no longer defined it. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. The past was behind me, and I had no desire to revisit it. Today, as I sit here, I can honestly say I have no regrets. Every struggle, every heartbreak, every painful lesson brought me here. To a life I'm proud of, a life I built with my own 2 hands, free from the shadows of those who once tried to control me. I am stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than I ever was before. And I know, deep in my bones, that no one can take that from me. The story of Patricia and Richard, of Ethan and all that came with him, is over. The story of Savannah, the real Savannah, is just beginning. And this time it's entirely mine.